Welcome to this presentation on the Book of Revelation. Here we will be looking at chapter 17. In this chapter we'll read about something called Mystery Babylon, and by the end of a chapter it won't be a mystery anymore, as Babylon will be revealed to us. Chapter 17 marks a break from previous chapters, particularly chapter 16, which was describing historical events, things as they unfolded. Now we have something that could be described as an appendix, or something that's inserted to help explain certain details relating to Babylon, what it's really all about. Let's read through these verses quickly, and then we'll start examining them one verse at a time. Revelation 17 and verse 1. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having seven heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon, the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast which carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of a bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and these are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and one is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. They shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his word, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So these 18 verses are very, very severe in their criticism of this thing called Mystery Babylon. And there is a lot of language in here that's very obscure. A beast that was, and is not, and shall be. What's all that about? First of all, we might ask, why is this chapter placed here? The previous chapter described the political events of the 19th and 20th century, And now we're given a summary about Mystery Babylon. And even though some of those things have been alluded to in previous chapters, the question is, why put this chapter here? We are at a time, in terms of progressing through the book of Revelation, we are in a time frame that's close to the end of the age, close to the return of Christ. So why place this here? One possible answer is because we're now reaching this end of the age. We will be talking about the final downfall, particularly in the next chapter. Also, at this stage in history, many people have largely forgotten the role played by the papacy in the persecution of Christians and the suppression of the Bible. In fact, if you try and say many of the things that we'll talk about here to many in the Christian world, they just don't want to listen. They'll close their ears. It's just too much for them. They find it difficult to accept. But when it comes to the Bible, if it points us in one direction, that's the direction we have to go. We're not free to pick and choose which verses we like, which verses we don't like. We have to look for the correct interpretation and follow that wherever it leads us. And if it leads us to condemnation of the Roman Catholic Church, then so be it. If it led us in a different direction, we would have to speak those words instead. Revelation 17:1, and there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of a great whore that sitteth upon many waters. And the many waters are explained later on in verse 15 of this chapter, that many waters represents peoples, multitudes, nations and tongues. And the whore represents something that spans many ethnic groups, many nations, and many languages. And it's about to face judgment. Then it continues in verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And this brings to mind verses in Daniel chapter 5 when it talks about the days of the ancient king of Babylon, Belshazzar, when his lords desecrated God's holy vessels, filling them with Babylonian wine and getting drunk. And in a somewhat similar manner, in these latter days, papal Rome has taken many of God's sacred symbols and doctrines and has poured its own wine of false teachings into them for her own glory and ends, causing the European nations in particular to drink the wine of her fornication. And of course, as we know, wine is a marker. Wine makes you lose your self-control, your sense of perspective, everything goes. In verse 3, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now the beast we identified when we looked at chapter 13 as the Babylonian sequence of kingdoms, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and now the kingdoms of Europe. And this is largely a political beast. The woman is riding on this political beast, and this woman can be identified from this chapter as the Roman Catholic Church. The symbol of a woman riding on a beast is also seen in Greek mythology, with Europa riding on a bull. And this imagery has been captured in a lot of the modern European times. A statue outside the European Council building in Brussels depicts this. Also the coins and stamps. Europa is now a symbol of the European Union. Fairly horrible story too behind it as well. And yet they take this and they make this their emblem. Full of names of blasphemy. And what's all this about? Perhaps first of all the title Holy Roman Empire, referring to the political attempts to to combine the nations of Europe into a single empire. It was very unholy. Also, the names of blasphemy must include many of the titles of a pope: Holy Father, a title that belongs to God alone; Vicar of Christ. Vicar actually means substitute for or in place of, and certainly the papal system has tried to substitute itself in the place of Christ. Supreme Pontiff of the Universal Church, probably a rather grandiose title. Prince of the Apostles, Pontifex Maximus, a title used by the Roman emperors. And many more names of blasphemy, particularly when you get to titles of Mary as Mother of God and Queen of Heaven. Full of names of blasphemy. This is just touching on the surface of these names, of course. And the way the Bible describes them, names of blasphemy, and they should be trembling when they use such titles. In verse 4, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And the golden cup is a perfect symbol of a representation of a communion cup of a Roman Catholic Church offered to the world. But instead of being the Lord's cup, it's the abomination of the Mass, which bears no resemblance to the communion of Christianity. Also in Jeremiah 51 verse 7, it talks about ancient Babylon and says, Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. And much the same thing has happened in modern times. Arrayed in purple and scarlet. Purple and scarlet are very prominent colours in the official ranks of the Roman Catholic Church, particularly for the cardinals and such. Having a golden cup in her hand, and it's interesting that this woman with a cup in her hand is often used in symbolic terms in Catholic symbology. In the statue on the left, you can see a picture of a woman holding a cup. It's a depiction of a Catholic faith, fides, as a woman holding a cup. And it's very common in statues and coins. The filthiness of her fornication. Very strong language. And it's symbolic language, predominantly depicting unfaithfulness to the Word of God, corrupting the gospel as a means to their own wealth and power. There is some literal fulfillment to a degree. When we say there's a literal fulfillment, we're not trying to contradict the symbolic interpretation, because that's what it's about, but sometimes a literal fulfillment is an example following after the pattern of the symbolic. But many of the popes were among the most immoral men in history. For example, the reign of 12 successive popes from Sergius the third through to John the 12th, 904 to 963 AD, is known as the pornocracy. It was that bad. And there are many, many other fairly horrible stories of popes and their behaviour. Not all the popes were like that. Some of the popes were relatively good people. Some of them were far from that. Verse 5, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And it's Mystery Babylon. A mystery is something people aren't aware of, something you don't know or don't understand. It's concealed. You have a murder mystery on television and you don't know who the suspect is, or the guilty party, I should say. Here we have a Babylonian religion, and it's a mystery. It's in a new disguise, and the world doesn't recognize it. The mother of harlots is a term that's used there. Quite consistently, they refer to themselves as the Mother Church. The children probably represent the churches that sprang up out of a Catholic Church, but are equally unfaithful to the Word of God. They removed many of the idolatrous practices and some of the symbols and emblems, but still unfaithful to the Word of God. We remember, of course, that in Genesis it talks there about every creature giving birth after its own kind, and so here, if we've got a mother church, it will give rise to children churches. So that's why we say it's referring to churches that sprang up rather than, for example, people who attend that church. And the reference to Mother Church is quite consistent throughout Catholic symbology. You see here the inscription at the base of the columns on either side of a central entrance door of St. John Lateran, the Cathedral of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. It reads in Latin words that translate to Sacred Latin Church, universally for the city and the world, Supreme Mother of Churches. This is the Mother Church. And when we come to Mystery Babylon, we can see when we compare ancient Babylon with this new Babylonian religion disguised in Christian terminology, we see many of the features of ancient Babylon carried through into modern Babylon. And to some degree it's not about individual points, whether such and such a thing is derived from such and such a thing, but we just see an overall pattern of similarity between the two. The birth of Tammuz, December 25th, and the supposedly birth of Christ in Jesus on Christmas Day. In reality, he was almost certainly born at a different time of year, maybe September. We see many other things from ancient Babylon. Midsummer Festival held on June the 24th, corresponding to the Nativity of St. John, held June the 24th. The assumption of Semiramis, the mother goddess in the Babylonian religion, and the assumption of Mary, who became Mother of God. And the Mother Goddess was worshipped as the Queen of Heaven, just as the Virgin Mary was worshipped as the Queen of Heaven. And when we say the Virgin Mary, we're talking about the Mary of the Catholic Church and not the Mary of the Bible. They're completely two different things. I want to make that completely clear, that we're not referring to the Mary of the Bible here, referring to the presented image of Mary that the Catholic Church holds to. There are 40 days of fasting for the Babylonian god Tammuz, and the 40 days of Lent. There's the festival of Easter and the festival of Easter. Exactly the same thing. The resurrection of Tammuz at Easter and the procession of graven images and the procession of graven images of Jesus, Mary and Peter during the Holy Week. It should be mentioned also that Easter occurs on a date that was specified by church decree around 325 AD, and in actual fact Jesus was crucified at the time of the Passover, and that these two don't exactly match. And so why switch from one date to another if you already have a date? If you were going to celebrate the crucifixion of Jesus in such a way, why switch the date to the date that it actually was to something else? And there are many, many other things: veneration of graven images, doctrine of purgatory, burning of incense, chants and repetitious prayers carried over into things like the Rosary and Hail Mary. The symbol of a cross was used in Babylonian times, still used in much of the Christian world. and a round disc wafer with IHS symbol eaten, and the same wafer used in the Eucharist in Catholicism. And you could go through many, many things. And it's not about whether a particular thing is derived from a particular religion or that, but just the overall picture. We get an image or something that's reappeared, the old Babylonian religion in a new form. And the long road of decline, step by step away from Christianity and towards something more like the old pagan religions. It was a very slow, gradual process, which is not what you will be told from the Roman Catholic Church. They will say they're unchanging, that all these practices have always been taking place, but actually many of these things were introduced through the ages. 300, you start to see prayers for the deceased and the sign of a cross being adopted. 375, a veneration of angels, dead saints and images of a saint. 394, the Mass becomes a daily ritual. 431, the official exaltation of Mary as the Mother of God and the Council of Ephesus. 500 AD, priests begin wearing special clothing. 526, extreme unction, the rite of healing. 593, purgatory, first enacted as binding doctrine upon all Catholics by Gregory the Great. 600, the now unknown language of Latin start to be used in worship. 600, prayers offered to Mary, dead saints and angels. 609, kissing of a Pope's feet. 786, veneration of crosses, statues, images and relics authorized. 850, holy water created by a pinch of salt, etc. And it just goes on and on. Century after century, more and more things start to creep in, as more and more like the old pagan religions and less like Christianity. As to the pagan origins, this is not just something that we're making up or a very small group of fanatics have made up. H.G. Wells, when he wrote his book, The Outline of History, he was looked at these things and said Christianity had taken on an extraordinary outward resemblance to the cults of Serapis, Amun, or Bel Marduk, the gods of Babylon. Also, Cardinal Newman admits in his book that the temples, incense, oil lamps, votive offerings, holy water, holidays and seasons of devotion, processions, blessings of the fields, sacerdotal vestments, the tonsure of priests, monks and nuns, images and statues are all of pagan origin. And that's the development of Christian religion by Cardinal Newman. In verse 6 in Revelation 17 it reads, "And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration," or great shock, more likely. A woman drunk on the blood of the saints. Very graphic imagery. Now the papal persecutions, the number of martyrs under papal persecutions far outnumbered the early Christian martyrs under pagan Rome. Hundreds of thousands among the Albigenses, Waldenses and Protestants of Germany, Netherlands, Bohemia and other countries. It just absolutely huge numbers of people, and we'll never know exactly how many, drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Anybody who rebelled against the authority of a pope, anybody preaching the true gospel would have been put to death during the medieval times, of course. And they burnt people at the stake. The reason for burning people at the stake is so that they couldn't be accused of shedding blood. Similarly, in Revelation 18:24 it says, "And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that was slain upon the earth. So responsibility for the death of the saints and the prophets, and the prophets speaking the word, and all those slain in the numerous wars and persecutions instigated by the woman representing the Roman Catholic Church, utterly condemning this Babylon. The Fourth Lateran Council, Canon 3 on heresy, in 1215 AD, reads, "We excommunicate and anathematize every heresy that raises against the holy, orthodox and Catholic faith, which we have above explained, condemning all heretics under whatever names they may be known. Let them be abandoned to be punished with due justice, clerics being first degraded from their orders. As to the property of a condemned, if they are laymen, let it be confiscated." So they're quite happy to take their possessions in the process of killing them. Secular authorities, whatever office they may hold, shall be admonished and induced, and if necessary compelled by ecclesiastical censure, to exterminate in all territories subject to their jurisdiction all heretics pointed out by the Church. So the Church was responsible for pointing out the heretics, and then they compelled the secular authorities to carry out this action. So they themselves didn't actually do it. They just forced the secular authorities to do it. And they confiscated the property where available. And in verse 7 of chapter 17 it says, "And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of a woman, and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns." So this is not a mystery to Jesus' servants, mystery to other people maybe, not to the servants of Christ. In Revelation 1:1, the first verse that we ever read in Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ which God gave unto him to show unto his servants. Jesus wanted to show his servants these things and explain these things. They weren't supposed to be a mystery to his servants. To other people, yes, they may well be a mystery. In Luke 8:10, "And he said unto you, It is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to others in parables, that seeing they might see, and hearing they might not understand." So some people were meant to understand the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but others, when Jesus spoke in parables, he did so deliberately so that some people would understand, but others, they would hear the words, but they wouldn't understand. Much the same when they read the book of Revelation. They read the words, they don't understand. Sometimes they even make up explanations, which they're not entitled to do. Matthew 11 verse 25, "At that time Jesus said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes." So the very wise, the smart people of this earth and according to this world, these things are hidden, just as the birth of Jesus was hidden from Herod, but revealed to the lowly people. In verse 8, "The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of a bottomless pit, and go into perdition." It sounds very cryptic, doesn't it? "And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is." It sounds very confusing. The beast that was is the Roman Empire. It is not, because it was going to be overthrown, that there would be the downfall of the Roman Empire after the invasions of the Goths in 476 AD. But it shall ascend, so it's going to re-emerge as the Holy Roman Empire, with the Roman Catholic Church at the helm. So this is the beast that was, and is not and shall ascend, because it's going to come to life again. And this is mentioned in Revelation 13:3, and it says, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." The deadly wound, of course, was the downfall of the Roman Empire, but it came back to life, or appeared to come back to life. In verse 9 it reads, "And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth." The 7 mountains, the only ancient city famous for 7 mountains is Rome. All Bible commentators agree this must be referring to Rome. And verse 10, "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. When he cometh, he must continue a short space." And it's been proposed that these may be 7 forms of government for ancient Rome. 5 have passed. The current one at the time of the book of Revelation was the Caesars, and the one yet to come was the Christian emperors. So these were the 7 heads, or 7 types of government, in addition to the 7 heads representing the 7 hills. "And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of a 7, and goeth into perdition." The 8th form of government, the Holy Roman Empire, was modelled on the old Roman Empire, and saying it's of and goeth into perdition. There's no future for this. It will go into perdition. It is not part of God's eternal plan. And of course the efforts to try and unite Europe and combine it into a single empire were always futile, because the nations would fight against each other. And if we had understood Daniel in chapter 2 and the statue with the feet of iron and clay, that the clay and iron didn't mingle, they would have understood that the nations of Europe just wouldn't mingle. They're a mixture of weak and strong, and they just can't bind together. The Vatican was not situated on one of the 7 hills of ancient Rome. However, it was later included within the city walls. It was effectively an 8th hill for the 8th head. After the sacking of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome by the Muslim Saracens in 846, the city walls were repaired and enlarged as a defensive measure by Pope Leo IX between 848 and 852 AD. The Pope fortified Vatican Hill against future attacks by including it within the perimeter of the newly strengthened city walls. So this is the 8th head becoming this 8th mountain within Rome. Verse 10, and the 10 horns, verse 12, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive powers, kings 1 hour with the beast. The 10 horns, they didn't yet exist at the time the revelation was given in around 96 AD. The 10 kings represent the kingdoms of Europe. They don't have a kingdom yet at the time of this book, but they acquired a kingdom at the kingdoms at the same time as the rise of the papacy. That doesn't mean there's exactly 10 nations, roughly 10 in terms of that number, but also 10 is a symbolic number there. And 10 is often associated with Europe, particularly when you get to decimal symbol units of measure, for example, the meters and the centimeters and the liters and all the other things, kilograms. In Britain, the imperial units were 12 inches in a foot and 16 pounds, 16 ounces in a pound and 14 pounds in a stone, so completely different. But Europe had the number 10. Verse 13, these have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. The kingdoms of Europe were the political power of the Roman Catholic Church, and that's why they tried so hard to keep Europe united under a single banner, because this was going to be their strength and their means of exerting political control. Verse 14, they shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And this is symbolic language, of course. They persecuted the Christians and tried to suppress the Bible, introduced false doctrines, but in the end they failed. The Lamb overcame them. They tried to suppress the Bible for many, many years, but they couldn't suppress it indefinitely, and we read about the appearance of the Bible in chapter 10 of Revelation. Also, to a degree, there's some literal fulfillment that are examples of symbolic language. There were wars launched against countries not subject to the papacy, crusades against dissident provinces and nations of Europe with large armies sent to destroy the non-Catholics, inquisitions to seek out heretics and put them to death if they didn't recant, with the use of torture to extract confessions. So they really did make war. The term make war is a very apt description of how they behaved. According to the syllabus of errors of Pope Pius IX, it is an error to say the Church has not the right to use force. And we see in this slide a medallion struck by Emperor Gregory the 13th to commemorate the slaughter of over 100,000 people in France. They can't deny it never happened because they struck a medallion to commemorate the event. There are many examples of suppression of the Bible. You will, of course, if you try and tell people that these days, they'll reject these things and try and water down what happened, but it really was the case that you weren't supposed to have a Bible. The decree set forth in the year 1229 by the Council of Valencia places the Bible on the index of forbidden books. The doctrine withholds it is forbidden for laymen, common man, to read the Old and New Testaments. We forbid them most severely to have the above books in the popular vernacular. The lords of the districts shall carefully seek out the heretics in dwellings, hovels, and forests, and even their underground retreats shall be entirely wiped out. Also, the Church Council of Tarragon ruled that no one may possess the books of the Old and New Testaments in the Romance language, and if anyone possesses them, he must be turned over to the local bishop within 8 days after the promulgation of this decree, so they may be burned. And a quote here from Pope Pius IX, not in medieval times, not in the Dark Ages, but in 1866, socialism, communism, clandestine societies, Bible societies, pests of a sort must be destroyed by all means. Bible societies are put in the same category as socialism and communism by the infallible Pope Pius IX. Verse 15, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations. Multitudes worshipping the papal system from all over the world, from many nations and ethnic groups. And incidentally, and we'll mention this again in the next chapter, but the obelisk in front of St. Peter's Basilica originally stood in front of a pagan temple in Heliopolis in Egypt, the center of Egyptian sun worship in olden days. In the Old Testament, these obelisks that stood there are mentioned as the images of Beth Shemesh in Jeremiah. He shall also break the sacred pillars of Beth Shemesh, and they that are in the land of Egypt. Beth Shemesh is translated as house of the sun. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, they shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Now the 10 horns, the nations of Europe. Europe was dominated by the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church, but they rebelled, took all the land, including the papal states, off her. And of course that rebellion took place during the Reformation, when many kings didn't want to be lorded over by the Pope. So for example, you see Henry VIII breaking away from the papacy. It's got an interesting phrase there, and these nations shall eat her flesh. Possibly a reference to the fate of Jezebel, or it could be a reference to the fate of a church that claims to be eating the flesh of Jesus in the communion. They claim to eat the flesh of Jesus when they have partake of their mass, but Jesus is saying no. Instead, others are going to eat your flesh and see how you like it. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. At the time of the prophecy, Caesar ruled the earth from Rome. It was the great city. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the popes began their reign again from Rome. But Christ said that his kingdom was not of this world. In John 18:36, Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Despite these things, the popes attempted to reign over the kings of the earth. Pope Gregory XI's papal bull of 1372 claimed papal dominion over the entire Christian world, secular and religious, and excommunicated all who failed to obey the popes and to pay them taxes. That bull was confirmed by subsequent popes, and 1568 Pope Pius V swore that it was to remain an eternal law. Pope Alexander II decreed that Harold, the lawful King of England, was a usurper, excommunicated him and his followers, and gave the throne to William, Duke of Normandy. Just an example of the way they claimed to reign over the kings of the earth. Pope Alexander III excommunicated the Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. The latter came for revenge with his armies against the Pope and was soundly defeated. Frederick I, the Emperor, came to Venice, where he grovelled at the Pope's feet with his face in the dust, begging forgiveness. This is the way the popes behaved during the Middle Ages. In 1155, Pope Adrian IV gave the crown of Ireland to the King of England, consigning the Irish to the merciless cruelties of Henry II. A later King of England, John Lackland, tried to break free from Rome, and Pope Innocent III forced him to surrender his crown. So these popes really did reign over the kings of this earth. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I hope you've been interested by the things that you've heard.